It was a warm evening in downtown Oak Haven, and the bustling streets were filled with chatter and life as people darted in and out of cafes and shops. Marcus Jones, a decorated Navy SEAL on leave, strolled casually down the sidewalk, dressed in a simple gray t-shirt, well-fitted jeans, and sneakers. He carried a leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder. Marcus was heading to a local bookstore to pick up a novel he'd been meaning to read. For the first time in months, his mind felt relaxed. Just as Marcus crossed an intersection, the unmistakable sound of a police car pulling up interrupted his thoughts. Tires screeched faintly as the car came to a halt. A white police officer, Officer Bryce, stepped out with deliberate slowness, his sharp blue eyes scanning Marcus like a hawk sizing up its prey. "Hey, you!" Bryce barked, his voice cutting through the street noise. Marcus paused mid-step, turning his head to meet the officer's gaze. "You're in a bit of a hurry, aren't you?" Bryce continued, his tone dripping with unwarranted suspicion. "Mind telling me where you're headed?" The question hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. Marcus remained calm. A few pedestrians slowed their pace, sensing tension, while others continued on, seemingly used to moments like this. Marcus tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Just heading to the bookstore," he replied evenly. Bryce folded his arms, his lips curling into a smirk. "Bookstore, huh? That bag of yours, what's in it? You carrying anything I should know about?" The implication was clear. Marcus felt the weight of the stares around him. He could already sense the prejudice behind the officer's words. But instead of anger or frustration, something else flickered in Marcus's eyes, quiet confidence. "You want to check?" Marcus asked, his voice steady, almost challenging. Bryce straightened his posture, clearly not expecting that response. "I'll be the one asking questions," he snapped. A beat of silence passed as the officer's hand hovered near his utility belt. The crowd subtly thickened as more people stopped, phones discreetly emerging from pockets. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, still relaxed, but something about his presence made Bryce hesitate. "All right, officer," Marcus spoke again, his tone as calm as before. "Let's do this the right way." The growing crowd murmured, their curiosity piqued by the crackling tension in the air. Marcus's composure, unshaken by the officer's implied threat, seemed to unnerve Bryce. The officer squared his shoulders and moved a step closer, his boots clinking faintly against the pavement. "Drop the bag," Bryce demanded, his tone harsher now, as if raising his voice might mask his uncertainty. Marcus remained still, his expression unreadable. "Sure," he said after a moment, carefully removing the bag from his shoulder and holding it out. His calmness wasn't submission, it was strategy. As Bryce snatched the bag, Marcus's gaze remained fixed on him. There was no fear in those dark eyes, only a quiet power that seemed to unsettle the officer further. "Hands behind your back," Bryce barked, reaching for the cuffs on his belt. At this, Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Am I under arrest?" he asked, his voice steady and unyielding. "You're being detained." Bryce shot back, avoiding the direct question. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for." The absurdity of the statement hung in the air like a bad joke. A few people in the crowd exchanged incredulous looks, and a woman holding a phone muttered, "Here we go again." Marcus gave a slow nod, his lips curving into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "All right, Officer Bryce, let me help you out," he said, stepping closer but keeping his movements deliberate. Bryce stiffened, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon. "Stay right there." Marcus stopped, raising his hands slightly. "Relax. I'm just giving you my ID." He reached into his back pocket slowly and pulled out a small, sleek card holder. From it, he extracted his military ID and handed it over. Bryce hesitated, glancing down at the card. His smirk faltered for the briefest moment as his eyes scanned the name, the rank, and the words, United States Navy SEAL, etched onto the ID. "You still think I fit the description?" Marcus asked, his voice as calm as ever, but now edged with subtle amusement. The crowd, sensing the shift, leaned in closer. Phones were now openly recording, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Bryce, clearly flustered, clenched his jaw, and tossed the ID back to Marcus. "This doesn't mean you're above suspicion," he muttered. "Stay put while I check your bag." Marcus crossed his arms, a small smile playing on his lips. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes said enough. "Go ahead and try to dig yourself out of this hole." As Bryce unzipped the bag and began rummaging through its contents, Marcus took a small step back. His calm demeanor was now laced with a quiet confidence that felt almost theatrical. "Make sure to show everyone what you find," Marcus said, gesturing toward the growing audience. The tension in the air was almost palpable as Bryce crouched slightly, pulling open the zipper of Marcus's leather messenger bag. The crowd leaned in, their phones trained on the scene like paparazzi catching a scandal. Inside, the contents of Marcus's bag were tidy, as though arranged with military precision: a neatly folded book, a stainless steel water bottle, and a sleek black laptop sat side by side. Bryce hesitated for a moment, his fingers grazing the book before pulling it out. "What's this?" Bryce demanded, holding up the book as though it were contraband. The title, "Leadership Under Pressure, A SEAL's Guide to Resilience and Excellence," was emblazoned across the front. The irony was lost on Bryce, but not on the murmuring crowd. Marcus's calm expression didn't waver. "That's a book I wrote," he said evenly, the faintest trace of amusement coloring his words. Bryce blinked momentarily, thrown off. "You wrote this?" he repeated, as though the idea were impossible. "That's what I said," Marcus replied, tilting his head slightly. "You want me to autograph it for you, or are you just planning to keep rummaging through my things?" A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd, and Bryce's face flushed red. He shoved the book back into the bag with more force than necessary, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "Cut the attitude," he snapped, his tone more defensive now. "This isn't over." Marcus raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, you're the one making a scene," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge that made it clear he wasn't intimidated. "I'm just trying to go about my day." Bryce ignored the comment and continued rifling through the bag, pulling out the laptop next. He inspected it as if expecting to find something incriminating. When that failed, he set it aside and moved to the last item, a small leather-bound journal. Opening it, Bryce flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowing. The journal was filled with neat, precise handwriting, detailing Marcus's thoughts and experiences from deployments overseas. A particular entry caught Bryce's eye. "You don't fight for recognition. You fight because it's the right thing to do. Leadership isn't about power, it's about service." Bryce froze for a moment, the words clearly resonating on some level he wasn't ready to admit. The crowd, meanwhile, began to grow more restless. "Anything illegal in there, officer?" Marcus asked, his tone polite but laced with quiet challenge. Bryce slammed the journal shut and shoved it back into the bag, his frustration now playing on his face. "You're free to go," he barked, stepping back as though trying to regain his authority. Marcus didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. "Not so fast," he said, his voice low but commanding. "You stopped me, accused me of fitting a description, rifled through my personal belongings in front of all these people. I think we're owed an explanation." The crowd erupted in agreement, voices calling out phrases like, "What's the reason?" and "You can't just walk away from this." Phones were now pointed directly at Bryce, their owners waiting for his next move. Bryce shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado slipping under the weight of the crowd's scrutiny. Marcus stood tall, calm and unflinching, his mere presence making it impossible for the officer to brush this off. Bryce's face was a mixture of frustration and unease as he glanced at the crowd surrounding him. The sheer number of phones recording his every move seemed to shrink the air around him. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a growing realization that he was now the one under scrutiny. Marcus locked eyes with Bryce, the silence between them stretching out like a challenge. "You're not going to answer?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying effortlessly over the murmur of the crowd. "What's this description I supposedly fit?" Bryce opened his mouth, but no words came out. The truth was glaringly obvious to everyone watching. There had never been a description, just an excuse. Let me guess, Marcus continued, his tone still calm but now tinged with sharpness. Black man walking down the street, minding his own business. That about sums it up, doesn't it? The crowd erupted into a mix of gasps and murmurs, the tension building with every passing second. Bryce's jaw clenched as he struggled to find a response, but Marcus wasn't finished. You see, officer, Marcus said, taking a step closer, what you just did wasn't about keeping the streets safe. It was about power. You thought you could humiliate me, intimidate me, maybe even escalate this into something worse, but you didn't expect me to stay calm, did you? Bryce's face flushed red, but he remained silent. You didn't expect me to be a Navy SEAL, Marcus continued, his voice steady but piercing. You didn't expect me to have the discipline to stay level-headed or the experience to see through your game. The crowd hung on every word, some cheering softly, others nodding in agreement. Marcus turned slightly, addressing the growing audience. This isn't just about me, he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. It's about the countless times this happens to people who don't have a camera watching, who don't have the training or the platform to push back. This isn't justice, it's harassment, and it needs to stop. The crowd responded with applause, their voices rising in support. Bryce, now visibly rattled, tried to interject. Hi, I was just doing my job, he stammered, his earlier bravado completely gone. Marcus turned back to him, his expression one of quiet disappointment. If this is how you define your job, maybe you're not cut out for it, he said simply. The words hit Bryce like a slap, and the crowd roared in agreement. People began calling out phrases like, hold him accountable, and file a complaint. Bryce looked around, his authority crumbling under the weight of public opinion. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it up. Here's the deal, officer, he said. You're going to stand here in front of all these people and explain why you stopped me. He let the implication hang in the air as he tapped his phone screen. Bryce's eyes widened as he realized Marcus had been recording the entire interaction. The officer opened his mouth, but no words came out. You don't owe me an apology, Marcus added, his voice cutting through the chaos. You owe every single person here an explanation for why you thought you could abuse your power. So go ahead. Talk. The crowd fell silent, waiting for Bryce's response. The officer's face was pale now, his earlier arrogance completely drained away. He shifted on his feet, clearly panicking under the weight of the moment. The weight of the moment bore down on Officer Bryce like a storm cloud. The crowd's expectant silence amplified his discomfort, beads of sweat forming on his brow as he searched for an escape from the corner he had backed himself into. Bryce stammered, his gaze darting between Marcus and the sea of recording phones. I was acting on suspicion. Just doing my duty, trying to ensure public safety. The crowd groaned, the flimsy excuse igniting murmurs of frustration and disbelief. A man near the front shook his head, muttering, same old story, while a woman called out, what suspicion? Say it plainly. Marcus's expression didn't change, but his presence seemed to grow more commanding. He took a deliberate step closer, his calm gaze locking onto Bryce's flustered face. Suspicion? Marcus repeated, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Let me make this clear, officer. Suspicion is not a license to harass. It's not an excuse to stop someone without cause, and it's certainly not justification for targeting someone because of the color of their skin. Bryce opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus raised a hand, silencing him. The crowd cheered softly at the display of quiet authority. You want to talk about suspicion, officer? Marcus continued, his voice rising slightly, his tone sharper now. What about the fact that you didn't ask anyone else on the street where they were going? What about the fact that you singled me out, rifled through my belongings, and tried to paint me as a threat, all without any evidence? Bryce's face turned red, his composure cracking under the intensity of Marcus's words. I wasn't singling you out, he sputtered, though his voice lacked conviction. Weren't you? Marcus shot back, his calm demeanor now tinged with righteous indignation. Because I don't see anyone else here being stopped. Or are you going to tell us all that they fit the same vague description you mentioned? The crowd erupted in support, some shouting, "Answer him," and "We see right through you." Bryce looked like a cornered animal, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by desperation. He glanced at the crowd, at the phones capturing his every move, and then back at Marcus, who stood tall and unyielding. Marcus lowered his voice, his tone softening but losing none of its power. "Here's the truth, Officer Bryce. You didn't expect me to push back. You thought you could get away with this because you've done it before, probably more times than you can count. But not today. Today, you picked the wrong person." Bryce stood frozen, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken accusations and the promise of consequences. Finally, with a defeated sigh, he mumbled, I understand." He looked out at the crowd, his gaze meeting the angry and disappointed faces. I'll file a report on the stop." He avoided eye contact with Marcus, his earlier bravado completely extinguished. The crowd remained, a silent testament to the injustice they had witnessed. Marcus simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. The warm evening in downtown Oakhaven had taken a sharp turn, the bustling streets now holding a stark reminder of the power dynamics that could play out in plain sight. The incident, captured on countless phones, would undoubtedly spark conversations and demands for accountability, forever changing how some residents viewed their local law enforcement. For Marcus, it was a stark reminder that the battles fought overseas were sometimes mirrored in the streets of his own country. The silence that followed held the weight of a community demanding change, a change that Officer Bryce, in his moment of blatant prejudice, had unwittingly set in motion.